Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming today. As Beth said, we have a really exciting panel. We do have one change in the lineup. Jonathan Rotberg from MIT's Next Lab couldn't make it because of the weather. He's stuck in Boston. But we have a fabulous replacement, another wonderful speaker, and I'll be introducing them right now. So basically, we should start with that. And our first panelist is João Geraldo Ferreira. He is the president and CEO of GE Brazil. He's a native of Rio and has more than 2 decades experience in the region. Our next panelist is Josh Morenstein from FUSEPROJECT. He's the design director at FUSEPROJECT, and he and Yves Bahar basically oversee all of their work, which ranges from the One Laptop Per Child project and the Watt Station, which you've been looking at early versions of in the lobby today in collaboration with GE. Our next panelist is Elizabeth Scharpf, and she is the founder of the Sustainable Health Enterprise. Her organization helps women in East Africa develop, distribute, and manufacture basically environmentally friendly and affordable sanitary pads. And the goal is to help women and young girls sort of empower themselves with having their own businesses and being able to attend school. And our fourth panelist, who we're delighted to join us at the very last minute, is Wendy BRAWER. Her work is in the triennial. Thanks, Wendy, for doing this at the last minute. So she's the founder of Green Maps, which she founded in New York 20 years ago. You'll learn more about her work as she presents. Everybody will tell us about their work and their specific examples as we sort of shoot them questions. And basically, Green Maps is going international now, so we thought this would fit in really nicely with the panel as we're talking about design in the so-called developing world and in emerging markets. And please keep in mind, too, we're talking about design for those areas of the world, but there are a lot of lessons that can be rolled into our work here in North America and Western Europe, and we're hoping to talk about that exchange. So we might as well just start with a question for João. And if we could talk a little bit about GE Brazil. I know that, and correct me if I got my statistics wrong, but they're very impressive. I think in the last 5 years, growth has averaged 12% per year.
Correct.
And the next global research center is going to be opening in Brazil.
That's correct.
Shortly. So,
so you know all the answers.
Well, my question to you basically is, coming out of that introduction, is, people look at design as global. They're looking at what goes on in emerging markets for ideas that can be pushed out globally. Can you talk about that, this new sort of design thinking, and how has that affected your work at GE Brazil and sort of globally?
I think the companies are really, paying attention to underserved markets, the kind of bottom, the pyramid, and the low-end consumer. They're trying to come up with products and solutions that would make sense and have a better understanding of their culture, their limitations, their income limitations and restrictions, and so forth, so they can come up with products that would address their needs. And mostly because if you take a look at developed markets, it's somewhat saturated. So they need to, different venues and white spaces for them to, keep growing and become even a more global company. And when you think of the role of design, more than ever, has been extremely important. It has been used by those companies to create a competitive advantage in those marketplaces by creating this, differentiation, a more compelling value proposition for those consumers. Because by the time you do that, you stay away from competing on pricing alone, for example. And pricing, as we all know, is not and has never been a competitive advantage. It has always been a comparative advantage, and therefore is not sustainable. You mentioned our GRC, and just for the audience, we have 4 global research centers in the world. One is in the US, Germany, China, and India, and the 5th one is going to be announced 1 month from now, and you're invited to come down to Brazil, if you will. And we are, what drives technology in our company is the fact that we need to take a look at the need, we need to take a look at our customers. And not necessarily the private sector, but in the case of Brazil, for example, because of the major bottlenecks that the country has from a development perspective, we need to take a look and talk to the government as a customer. And we're absolutely committed to doing so in Brazil, for example, mostly in the areas of health, energy, and transportation, and water reuse and water sewage, for example. Stepping away from Brazil, I think one great example in terms of ourselves developing something for the emerging markets, we developed this cardiogram machine called iMac 400. And that product was developed in India, for India, at a price point that made a lot of sense, that would address the country's dynamic at that point of time. And I would say that it's being produced and developed, and not developed, but sold across the globe.
And in the United States, too.
I would say so,
yeah,
yes.
Yeah, through Western Europe and the United
Yes.
States. That might be a good springboard to Josh, because you've been collaborating with GE on WattStation.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if if there's been any inspiration from your other projects at Fuse that you've done, like say the One Laptop Per Child project, that informed your work on WattStation. How do those, designing for those 2 different markets sort of come together?
Right. Well,
as a designer?
They, on the surface, I think they seem very different because
Yeah.
obviously, if you guys have seen the media spots on NBC, the WattStation is obviously shown in North America, and it's part of a developed system. Whereas something like OLPC was for parts of the world that people had never seen or used any type of consumer electronic, much less a laptop. And one of the things that we don't talk as much about when we spoke about OLPC was that there was an ecosystem of products. So, not only did people not have the experience of using a laptop computer, but they had nowhere to charge it. They had no web infrastructure. There was no DSL lines or Comcast or other systems to plug into. So we had to create a lot of peripheral elements, which really are part of the main system. We had to create little charging stations that were solar, relay stations that were on roofs. There were cranks to charge the device in homes where there is no central electricity. For the WattStation, it's actually quite similar in that people are designing electric cars, whether it's something that gets a lot of attention like the Tesla or the Nissan Leaf. I think Kara mentioned it earlier on the panel prior to ours, where there's this sort of cart and horse catch-22 scenario where people are developing cars, but there's nowhere to charge them. So the limitation is, how am I gonna go for a drive down, say, from San Francisco to Los Angeles if my car only goes for 40 minutes. So the similarity is in that we have to create an ecosystem of products, and we had to use some of that same thinking so that people would not be hindered in their decision to purchase or to use an electric car by, it's going to be inconvenient, because these types of things, these new systems are always a little bit inconvenient, or at least they try our preconceived notions of the way things should be.
And sort of, do you have any images that you wanted to show, or
I
do
don't
we
know.
have this queued up?
I do have images. They're
so
not
we
on
can
the wall.
get that in
Let's
our-
see,
in our
are they
heads in
tweeting
terms
them?
of
No.
how-
Oh, there's one. That has nothing to do with what we just talked about. This is
how the
this is an
design-
electric vehicle. We can talk about that in a second. But if we go to the next slide, there it is. There's the GE WattStation. So this is also in real life, you can go out and maybe touch it if no one tells you not to. But the notion here is that these things exist very much like parking meters, and you can drive your electric vehicle up and get a charge every time you stop. So again, you know, our sense of filling up is that I fill up my tank of gas, I put in, I don't know, 20 gallons, and I'm pretty good to go for 300 miles, depending on what kind of car you have. Whereas with an electric vehicle, you're going to have to, in many cases, charge every time you stop. So there's going to be a level of, and this will change, of course, as the amount of power that comes through the cord, so to speak, charges your car faster and faster. But the idea here was that we developed a station that people would be able to plug in. They'll be readily available. And if you go to the next slide, I hope. Well, the next slide is of a, you'll just have to, oh, that comes in different colors. If you go to the next slide after that, there you go. That might be in your home, for example. So every time you drive in and you pull your car into the back of the garage, you can plug your car in. And over the course of a few hours, while you and your car rest, the car will charge and you'll be ready to go for the next morning. So creating a system, creating an ecosystem around this makes it a much more seamless experience.
So those are two really fascinating examples, you know, the iMac from GE, the OLPC sort of folding into the Watt station. That sort of brings me to a question for Elizabeth. You've done a lot of research, obviously, when putting together your organization, hundreds of interviews with girls and women in East Africa. What sort of advice can you give in terms of what designers should keep in mind when they work with these types of communities, either with that as the end goal, or to sort of come up with ideas that can be rolled out globally?
What Josh said just now about the ecosystem really resonated with me, and I think the takeaway is don't assume. Well, for me, the takeaway was don't assume you know everything, or actually be prepared to be wrong. Is one of the things that I learned. And what I was wrong about when I started up SHE, it was basically to try to use business to basically help developing economies grow, and rather than the charity model, let's jumpstart businesses. So the first initiative we started was actually called SHE28. We have a video, maybe Mark can cue it up. And it was about addressing the problem of millions of girls and women missing school and work because pads were too expensive, menstrual pads were too expensive, and the alternative was not necessarily effective. And so I thought going in, okay, we're just going to go in, and it's because the raw materials are too expensive. So the first thing we did was check out different raw materials we could use that would be low cost, and we could substitute for all the imported materials. So we actually found some banana fibers that ended up being pretty absorbent, and although that's the sexy part of our project. I know I said menstrual pads and sexy in the same paragraph.
And banana fiber.
And banana fiber. But,
Banana fiber.
but what we realized was that it's not just about the raw materials and the product design, but actually this ecosystem design. And so my assumption was completely wrong in the beginning, and what we ended up finding out was actually almost 50% of the price of the lowest cost pads in Rwanda, where we are doing our pilot right now, are actually distribution costs. So there's 2 to 3 middle people by the time it goes from manufacturer to the end consumer. And this I don't think is necessarily the case in the US for GE. I don't know, I'd be curious on that to hear that. The other thing is taxes. There's an 18% tax on pads and other products in Rwanda and elsewhere. And so here I come in with a fresh out of business school thinking, I'm going to jumpstart these businesses. And really the first thing we ended up doing was creating a health and hygiene curriculum, was creating, actually leveraging the existing resources, which are vast networks of people that could be great distribution networks. and training them in business skills to try to drop the distribution costs to lower the price to pad. And then we got to sexy. But maybe we can show the video of our first initiative, which is Sheet 28. Gives you a little better sense of what we're up to. Hit it, Mark. He's back there somewhere.
So it's really fascinating to hear all of these different stories, one after the other, and see how they inform each other and sort of how new styles of design thinking are coming up to the forefront when working on these global projects. So speaking of that, Wendy, maybe you can talk a little bit about the challenge of taking a local initiative like Green Maps and bringing it international after 20 years of it being on sort of the local scale.
Actually, it's been global for about 15 years.
Okay.
We're now in over 700 communities in 55 countries where people are getting together to talk about what do they care about in their community as far as its environment goes, what's happening on the social innovation front, what about sustainable resources, and they put them together on a map. And usually it's paired with local culture and things that people love, and these maps are very diverse, but the thing that links them all together is an iconography. Now there's 170 universally designed, globally designed universal symbols that help good ideas be identified, promoted, and linked, as well as helping them be transferred to new communities. And actually, part of my inspiration came right from Brazil. Curitiba, which is one of the most sustainable developing world cities, or two-thirds world cities, I should say. It was because of an exhibit about Curitiba that we got the support to print the first edition of the New York Green Map back in 1992. And I'm thrilled that they're now part of our global network as well. But it was exactly what was going on there in that community where very low cost, very people-oriented technologies were taking root and transforming people's livelihoods and lives. We wanted to help those ideas get out there. And that is part of the idea behind creating this global symbol system. Richard Saul Worman mentioned earlier today that all cities have a different way of describing themselves in their planning documents. This iconography is part of our answer to that question on the community front. However, now we have lots of cities where the municipalities are also using our tools to help communicate amongst all their agencies and the community members, because we all need to get to see the same image of where we live in a way, perceive that we are making progress towards sustainability, or what parts of our community are being left out of this development and being dumped on. How can we start to address those things? So I'm really pleased that we're growing. We're adding new cities at a rate of over 30% faster every single year, taking on and using these tools. And last year we launched a social mapping platform that's growing very well. And we have so many things we can do when we can start to look locally and share globally what we're doing. So we're actually even this week testing out for the first time in New York markers, on-site markers. You don't need a map, you don't need our iPhone app or a mobile website, but you can see the places as you walk down the street. So how does that invite a different audience to get involved with sustainability in their community? So this is on 14th Street, part of the Art and Odd Places Festival that's on for the next 10 days.
That's actually a good jumping off point to a question that we have from @Erica via Twitter, which it would be great if you all could jump into this one. Basically, @Erica asks, can innovative and thought-provoking design translate globally? I mean, I think you've addressed that a little bit, but let's talk about that. I mean, obviously you're taking healthcare equipment and with interfaces that can translate globally. What's the challenge in terms of it pushing that further and being really innovative and going beyond sort of what we see today?
Yeah, you mentioned thought-provoking ideas. I'd like to come back to something that Rick mentioned in the beginning, which was, design life or life design. When you live in a country that had approximately 80% inflation a month, you have to be creative to survive, right? It's not a matter of designing just a new product or designing your life in a way that you need to survive, because prices, was going up on a daily basis. So you go to a supermarket on a Monday, on Tuesday the price was absolutely different, was actually higher than this. So the money has no value at this point in time. So basically you have to be innovative. You have to design your life in a different way. So, as opposed to be talking about product, I'll, go back to something that Rick mentioned, that is that something that it can be replicable or deployed or used in developing markets? Absolutely so. And I think, I have lived in those times. And living at 4.5% inflation a year today is kind of easy. So I think it can be easily deployed from a life perspective. How can you deal with this sort of challenge in your life, for example, in developing markets?
Does anybody else want to jump in with that idea
Can I
of?
see the question?
Yeah, it's basically, yeah, here we go.
I'll jump in.
Great.
I think it's absolutely, things can go global as long as you not only have the right leadership, local leadership, but trust that leadership. And I come from the business/international development world, where I would say, even when, let's say you're in Rwanda, I think it's not that uncommon to have someone that grew up, 10,000 miles away from there be the local leadership in Rwanda. And for me, that doesn't really make too much sense, because there are some things that, there are lots of things that my COO, Julian Kayabanda, knows and has experienced that I could never get any master's degree or whatever it is for that experience. But I think it's, sometimes it doesn't go as you mapped out in your business plan. But those are the great, pleasant surprises. I'll give you an example. When I was in Rwanda in March, I told you about how taxes are a big issue on pads in Rwanda, and just even awareness in general. I think that's why there are taxes, and people knew that girls weren't going to school because there were taxes on pads and other reasons. Then maybe the taxes would go away. Well, I get there, and I think we're going to be going and checking out different factory locations. Instead, Julian said to me, "Oh, Elizabeth, by the way, we have a meeting later with the campaign crew." What are you talking about? We never talked about this in our schedule of activities in the next. I can be type A sometimes. And she said, "Oh, well, I've been organizing 10 grassroots organizations to kick off this campaign nationally to bring the organizations together to march, get the public to march across the city wearing red shirts and have a big public discussion in the small stadium. And we can all talk about bringing in big leaders from the ministries and talk about the obstacles for girls going to school and get commitments from people." And I'm thinking to myself, march across. First of all, I was, wow, I didn't know you did this. And then I thought, march across the city with red shirts on? And then I thought, have a big public discussion about menstruation and other obstacles to girls schooling? And I wouldn't probably do it down 14th Street. I mean, maybe Wendy's doing it with her project, but
Different color shirt.
yeah, a different color shirt. I'd have green.
Green.
But it was so successful, and that's because of her fantastic skill and experience. It's something I've never learned anywhere.
I think if design's innovative and thought-provoking, then it's going to be global, right? I mean, I don't want to be glib. I don't want to say like everything that I've designed is appropriate for anywhere in the world, or both from a functional standpoint or from a aesthetic standpoint. But I think that's sort of the interesting part of every project that a designer works on, is that you start to see it kind of trickle into either other parts of the world or other categories that you hadn't expected, whether it's a piece of furniture or whether it's a toothbrush or whether it's a piece of consumer electronics. So, and I think that's sort of our responsibility is I think at least in the early stages, we've seen some different presentations on process and whatnot. I think in the early stages of every design project, and the designers who are here will know exactly what I'm talking about. It's like we're all over the place. We're coming up with the craziest ideas, which aren't actually all that crazy. It's just whether or not at the time they're actionable or not. And ultimately, some of those crazy ideas make it into the final, tangible result. And usually, hopefully, it's innovative and thought-provoking, and it trickles, and it inspires other projects as well.
And when did you want to add to that?
Well, we're all so linked in such a deep-seated way right now, but yet we're all still so different. And I think that's part of our most important role, is to listen to everybody and to create things in a way that can be adapted, so it really fulfills the need on a local level in many places at once. I was thinking when you were showing your electric charging station, I worked with a group of architects and economists here in New York on a similar project in 1993, and instead of designing the device, we redesigned the city. And we redesigned it for this particular year. So here we are 17 years later. EVs are just starting to come in, but so many of the other things that we envision for the city are already on our streets, because we were looking at the overall goal, which is a healthier environment that accompanies mobility, right?
Yeah.
So we were looking at those quality of life issues instead of the vehicle and the charging per se. And I would do the same thing with your problem. You're trying to solve the goal, solve the question, why pads? Why is that the answer to this question for women and girls? Is it a cultural thing? Maybe it is, that I don't know about. Because we know there's other options out there. I mean, I remember the sponge.
So we have about 5 minutes left, and this is a conversation. So we'd love to welcome questions from you. Please.
Sure. So about a year ago, we rolled out our first pilot, and it was. Oh yeah. Sure. The question. Thanks, Bill. Oh. The question was, where are you right now, in terms of your milestones? So we rolled out a pilot starting in November of last year, And we piloted what I was talking about earlier, health and hygiene education with, we've reached about 5,000 people, because when we found out, we did a lot of homework. We talked to hundreds of girls and women and found out that there were questions on why do I menstruate? So we realized that there are, and it's not just also, and the solution's not just an affordable pad. There are many, many people that will continue to use rags, which is the common practice, but the practice right now is not necessarily, we wanted to give options, so showing people how to boil the water and make sure that it dries in a sun-filled area. So we did health and hygiene education, and then also, like I said, we set up 50 small sole proprietor distributors, which were community health workers, and they were already going and talking to people in the community. And so what we did is we cut out the middle people, and we bought the existing generic pad in Africa at wholesale, and we were able to drop the price by 15–20%, and that includes a commission for those community health workers to sell. So they were making some income. Now we're at the end. We have a great technical team lined up, and we're at the end of product development using local Rwandan banana fibers. And we are getting ready to roll out our local manufacturing. So very exciting by the, hopefully, end of the year, beginning of 2011.
Another question? Comment? Oh, yes, right over here.
That's a really good question. So there's something, just repeat, how do we, there's great research, lots of ideas, things already started in a lot of developing countries. How can we get designers, how can we link designers to take that and run with it, essentially, as a team? And I think that comes down to bringing different communities together. I've had the privilege of, it's funny, someone said, oh, will you speak at the design conference? And I said, just caution, I'm not a designer. And I think our team as a quilt are designers, but everyone comes from a different place. And I think that's what we have to do as a global community, is take the World Bank, the development world, and I think you're talking about the marketplace of ideas that they have. Okay. Okay. So I think it's to push more into interdisciplinary, whether it be conferences or studies at universities, to push that agenda as much as you can. And I would love it if we asked the audience today, how many of you are from industrial design and business and health, and wouldn't it be fantastic if everyone was from all over the place? So I think it's really getting the interdisciplinary community together. That's Bill's job.
And that's a great way to sort of wrap up our conversation. It flew by very quickly for us, and we're all looking forward to the conversation continuing today. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And thank you.